Welcome to everyone who's joining us. We'll get to start in a moment. We're just still logging people in. It looks as though we've pretty much got everybody who's waiting in the lobby. Okay, we'll make a start. Welcome to everybody who's managed to get in. Hopefully others will join us as we go along. People aren't always completely on time. My name's Chris Frost. I'm a member of the NUJ's National Executive and I'll be chairing this meeting. Quick word from our sponsors. I've always wanted to say that. Our co-organisers, Oldham Trades Council and the Word newspaper, have asked me to pass on a message to you before we start. Essentially, they're saying thank you very much for attending today. The main reason for helping to organise this meeting with Manchester and Salford NUJ is freedom. The Word, which is published online and in print, came together 6 years ago as a non-profit making collective to provide a community-led democratic counterweight to mainstream media. We need to show solidarity with Julian from across the trade union movement and through any political grouping or individual that values the truth. Every day and every meeting that trumpets Julian's name strikes a blow for honesty. The more Julian is written about, talked about and read about, the longer this world remains free. So that was from our co-organisers. Thank you very much to them for their support. We're here to talk about Julian Assange and justice and freedom. Julian needs a little introduction here from me. He's well known as the Australian editor, publisher and activist who founded WikiLeaks in 2006, a web page that was exposing many wrongdoings before it fell foul of the US government in 2010, following intelligence leaks about these US Army's doings in Afghanistan and other US-led wars. Since then, he's been persecuted by the authorities there, seeking to extradite him to answer charges under the Espionage Act, first in Sweden and then, as we all know, in London. I'll leave others who are much better qualified than me to pick up this wretchedly familiar tale of oppression, but I'm sure we all understand that attempts to shut down Assange and WikiLeaks is a massive attack on journalism, freedom of expression, and the right to be informed, and that affects us all. I'll introduce our speakers as it's their turn to speak, starting with Stella Morris in a minute or two. I'll take questions and comments after the speakers have finished. If you can put your questions on the question and answer piece, there is also the chat line, and so if you want to put comments there, of course, you're very welcome. I'll read out some of the questions. If you particularly want to speak, and no long speeches please, but comments or whatever, then let us know and we'll try and cut you in at the appropriate time. Our first speaker is Stella Morris. She was raised in Botswana, Lesotho, Sweden and Spain, and in 2002 she moved to the UK where she studied law and politics at the University of London's SOAS College and at Oxford. She joined Julian Assange's international legal team led by Balthazar Garzon in 2011, and in 2015 she and Julian became a couple. They have 2 children born in 2017 and 2019. So this really is personal for you, Stella, and we're very, very grateful to you to join us today. I'll leave it open to you to say whatever you want. 8 minutes, please.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for organizing this. Well, I could talk for a long time, but I see Julian once or twice a week in Belmarsh prison, and he's been there for almost 3 years. It will be 3 years in April, and you know, it's hard because we don't know which way, how this will end. And it's a bizarre place, a prison. It's a cruel, grim place, which has lost all its logic, even from a criminal justice perspective, and especially a place like Belmarsh. It's an atrocity to have Julian in Belmarsh, not just because he's being punished, for doing his job, for doing what is protected, or we say is protected in a democratic society. But also because of the extraordinary cruelty of it. And I think when we look at this case, and I'm taking it a bit out of the personal now, but I think this is what explains to some extent the lack of engagement in some quarters, is that it is like everyone is the frog in the pot that has been slowly getting hotter and hotter. And there's perhaps a lack of understanding of what is at stake, of understanding that Julian's life hangs in the balance, a lack of understanding that he is being punished for the most lauded work that WikiLeaks has done, for which he has won dozens of awards, including journalistic awards, like the Martha Gellhorn Prize and so on. And that they are punishing him for the most, not for his any perceived faults of his, but because of the virtues that WikiLeaks has achieved. And so the attack on Julian and on WikiLeaks is really stark, because it is literally criminalizing telling the truth. It is criminalizing doing the most important journalism that can be done, and really criminalizing the public's right to know. Julian has been in this kind of extraordinary situation because this is a political case, but it has a veneer of legality. For 12 years now. He was arrested on the 7th of December, 2010. This was 7 days after WikiLeaks started publishing Cablegate. 6 days after Sweden issued its international arrest warrant. 5 days after the banking blockade started with Bank of America and PayPal and 3 others shutting down donations against WikiLeaks, and a multi-pronged attack on WikiLeaks. And the legal attack is just one. The legal attack, the financial attack, the public opinion, the attack on Julian's support has been extraordinary. And it started from 2010, I'd say, but in a really concerted manner in 2017 when Pompeo became the head of the CIA. We've recently learned about the CIA's comprehensive multi-pronged attack against Julian, which included plans to murder him, and that these assassination plans were discussed in the White House while Mike Pompeo was head of the CIA. There were plans to kidnap Julian and to rendition him. There were talks about black sites, and this was all during a time during which there was no indictment. The indictment came after. It came after and in the context of the CIA plotting to assassinate him. We're talking about a conspiracy to murder a journalist. And I think we need to bring things back to their proper framing, because somehow with the attacks there have been on Julian's person, there has been a kind of complacency that Julian is a special case, but he's not a special case of anything at all. He is the representation of journalism at its finest, at its bravest. He is being made an example of as a deterrent. He is not being prosecuted as a whistleblower. He is being prosecuted as a publisher. And I think this is one of the main shifts that people need to understand, how this prosecution is so unprecedented. Julian is being prosecuted under the Espionage Act, but there is no allegation that WikiLeaks was working for a foreign state or anything like that. The allegation is that he received information from a journalistic source, that he possessed that information, and that he communicated it to the public. And those accusations make up 2 life sentences when you put together the potential sentence just of those accusations. He faces 17 charges under the Espionage Act for committing the crime of journalism, and this is the new reality we're in. And Julian has a lot of support, and I want there to be a shift of understanding that he actually has enormous support. He has support from all the mainstream human rights and press organizations like yourselves, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch in the United States, the Committee to Protect Journalists, and so on. They're all on the same page. And he also has enormous popular support. There was just last week, there was a fundraiser in the crypto world, which raised $50 million for Julian's defense. And that was over 10,100 contributors who contributed to raise that amount of money. And that is a show of the democratic popular support that Julian has. And I mean, we can go into, you know, the scene in the UK press maybe later on. I don't want to drag things on, but you know, that this meeting we're having today, all of this is really important. It's important, and it's very encouraging to Julian to see engagement in the UK with this issue, because it has devastating consequences on so many levels. And I think that's not properly understood, on how many levels it has a devastating effect on journalists in the UK, on refugees in the UK, on dissidents, on free speech, and on the free press globally.
Thanks very much indeed, Stella. We all sympathise with you. It must be really, really difficult. Just before we move on to the next speaker, there is one question that's come in that's probably you're the best person to ask. Anthony Walsh asks, how is Julian's physical health and also his mental and emotional health? He says he's been writing to him since he was in the embassy. He wants to know, is he getting mail in Belmarsh? Are you able to answer those?
Well, his health is in decline. For the 7 years he was inside the embassy, he had no outdoors space that he could access, no sunlight. It was a very unhealthy environment, but Belmarsh is 10 times worse. And, you know, he doesn't get enough. It's hard to describe, you know, if you're in a cell for over 20 hours a day, sometimes, you know, 24 hours a day, you just can't move enough. And just the willpower to get up and pace up and down, which is all you can really do, or find other ways to keep your body moving, is also, you know, it's hard. It's hard on a mental level. It's hard on a physical level. And, you know, Julian's been there for almost 3 years. So he's a very strong person and a strong-willed person. But it's really difficult for him, and he is deteriorating. In October, he had a mini stroke. He can't have the type of medical attention and checks that he would need. The fact of having Julian there on remand, you know, he's not charged of anything or accused of anything in the UK. He's there solely because the US wants to extradite him in this outrageous case. And I'm extremely worried, for every day that passes, I'm extremely worried. And as anyone who's been in prison or who has had a family member or known someone in prison knows, the worst thing that can happen to you in prison is you get some kind of health crisis, because even just breaking an arm can become enormously complicated, because you can't see doctors on time, because things aren't checked properly, because something that you would be able to solve easily on the outside can become potentially catastrophic on the inside. So it's a constant state of anxiety that we're in, that something might happen.
Well, thanks, Stella. I mean, it's an appalling story, but I hope that answers Anthony's question. Move on to our next speaker, who is former NUJ President Tim Dawson. He's observed a number of the Assange extradition hearings on behalf of the International Federation of Journalists, as well as reporting the proceedings daily for the Morning Star. He's worked as a journalist for newspapers, magazines and televisions for many years, and convenes the IFJ working group on the surveillance of journalists. Tim, I throw it over to you.
Thank you very much, Chris, and thank you, Stella. Can I just apologise at the outset? I had a quick shave before the meeting to be able to give you my best, but unfortunately I've cut my chin, so if it appears that I've been in a scrape with a razor gang as we go ahead, I can only apologise. And just to sort of emphasise a point that Stella made, and I say this only because I was there for the entire extradition hearing. You would expect somebody who knows somebody as well as Stella clearly does to feel enormously concerned about the health of Julian Assange. But during the extradition hearing, we heard, I think, from 4 separate medical doctors about his physical condition in Belmarsh, and it was really quite chilling. I mean, clearly it has gone up and down, but he has lost weight. He has been in a desperate psychological state. He's had long periods of obsessive suicidal ideation, as it's called. I mean, this is from independent doctors with no axe to grind. So I think there is every reason to feel really quite concerned, and worth bearing in mind, of course, that Belmarsh is a significantly more sympathetic environment to any of the penal facilities that it's likely that he would face were he extradited to the United States. My interest in this case, I'm aware there are lots of people for whom Julian Assange and his work are really important things, and for whom the case is very much about him. And I salute them, and they've done a great job of keeping this case in the public eye and keeping pressure up. My concern, however, really is about the broader implications for journalism. What I see, I think if this prosecution does succeed, it will deliver really an almost fatal blow on one of the most important of underpinning principles of journalism. And to understand why that is requires some understanding of the charges that he's being sought on. As Stella mentioned, they are, I think, all but one of them come under the Espionage Act, this sort of very antique piece of legislation that American administrations have tended to use very selectively, mostly as it happens on internal threats, labour leaders, trade union leaders, and people of that ilk. It's rarely been used for the kind of foreign spies, as its title might suggest. Almost all the charges deal with the real mechanics of how the stories involved in the Iraq and Afghan war logs were obtained. So at the extradition hearings, we heard really very detailed accounts of how this disaffected and very concerned soldier, Chelsea Manning, sort of reached out online saying that she had seen material in the course of her job that gave her great concern about the lawfulness of the work, of the information that she was processing. And she came into contact with somebody who it's alleged is Julian Assange, who discussed over an app called Jabber, how she might find more information that would substantiate her fears, how it might be extracted from servers in such a way that didn't leave a trail, how certain passwords might be evaded, and how she might look out for other information that would potentially be useful in what she thought was her moral duty to expose this wrongdoing. And really, that process of working with a source, with a whistleblower, is something that is at the very heart of a lot of the very best journalism. It's quite interesting to just to compare the work that the person alleged to be Julian Assange did with Chelsea Manning, and say the work of the Guardian journalist Ewan McCaskill with Edward Snowden, the NSA whistleblower. And now I don't know Ewan, but I have shared platforms with him 2 or 3 times, and he has described a very similar process of somebody reaching out saying, I have this information, being shown enough of it to realize how important it might be, and then helping them progressively to reveal it. So if this prosecution happens, I see it as an assault on absolutely anybody who works with whistleblowers, and it would open up the possibility of any journalist doing work with whistleblowers, particularly those concerned with American security, to this kind of judicial snatch squad from the United States. And even although I don't doubt there are many brave journalists who would say, I don't care what they do, I will carry on doing what I believe is my vocation. Clearly, some are going to think, well, does the story justify the potential of the 175 years in prison that Julian Assange is threatened with? And whistleblowing. Obviously the case that we're concerned with most particularly here is all about the conduct of a war, but whistleblowing happens in all sorts of walks of life. My mind turns to Catherine Gunn, who blew the whistle about how dirty tricks were being used to swing votes at the UN, or Terry Bryan, the health worker who helped expose serious wrongdoing against old people in the Winterbourne View Hospital, or Asita Mba, who whistle blew emails that showed that HMRC had developed a sweetheart deal with Goldman Sachs that was being used to the huge advantage of their clients and consequently the huge disadvantage of general taxpayers. So if a body blow is dealt to the process of whistleblowing and the process that journalists use to expose this kind of wrongdoing, I think it will mean that the amount of information that's out there, the amount that we learn about how society is being administered on our behalf, will be radically reduced. And actually, interesting on the subject of whistleblowers, one of the things that I do take heart from in this case, the story again that Stella mentioned, 30 former CIA operatives provided information, I think, to Yahoo about this extraordinary campaign to kill or to kidnap Julian Assange that the Americans contemplated while he was still in the Ecuadorian embassy. And you've got to think, well, what would it take for 30 people? These are people who worked for the CIA. So you can imagine they're people who are kind of quite comfortable, quite professionally relaxed about what the CIA does most of the time. But they see this plan shaping up to kidnap somebody on the streets of a friendly capital, or even to murder them, and they're sufficiently concerned about it that when a journalist asks them about it, they say, "Yes, I feel I can tell you about that." Even although Mike Pompeo himself says that they should all be thrown in prison, and who knows, he might one day get the chance to do that. They are so worried, so concerned about the criminality that's being contemplated that they themselves became whistleblowers. It does make, I think there is an important question about what can we do? What can we do to keep the pressure up? What can we do to bring this to more people's attention? Now, I think what's really important is bringing up in every arena that we can how important it is that a public's right to know and journalists' right to feed that right to know is maintained and defended. And of course, what's happening to Julian Assange is the most important visible, dramatic case at this moment that's a help in focusing people's attention. But actually, I think there's merit in broadening it out and saying, there are other things happening. I know that Mohammed will later talk about the Official Secrets Act reform that's currently being discussed, so I won't say any more about it, but talking about the other ways in which there are assaults on our right to know, on the physical threats that journalists face when doing their work on the streets, on the many legislative challenges that there are to doing that work. I think saying as a citizenry that we're concerned about these restrictions on our right to know, and kind of at the very crest of that, the threat to Julian Assange in every arena that we can, is really important. I think raising it with elected representatives is important. I think the fact that there is legislative reform in prospect is an extra reason for that to happen. But for all that, it would clearly be wrong for our legislature to put pressure on the judiciary. It nevertheless makes a difference. The more members of Parliament, members of the Scottish Parliament, and so on, who have had a constituent go to them and say, these assaults on our right to know, on our freedoms, on the freedoms of people to do journalism, are a matter of concern. I think the more I think that will start to have an effect. I would issue one very slight caution. I think, okay,
the last one, Tim.
I'll be quick. We are in the business of persuading the skeptical, not berating our enemies. And I think explaining the importance of this rather than trying to attack people who we think thus far haven't been persuaded is a way to that risks alienating potential supporters. So if you think that we have a right to know, then keep up the campaign that Julian Assange shouldn't be prosecuted. If you think that when the military make mistakes, we have a right to know and a right to hear why that's happened, then Julian Assange shouldn't be prosecuted. And if you think that seeking the truth is a sacred vocation, not a shady crime, then I would urge you to campaign for Julian Assange not to be prosecuted. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Tim. We've got a short video now from Rebecca Vincent. Rebecca's a human rights activist who's presently working for Reporters Without Borders. She was their founding UK bureau chief in 2016 and has recently been promoted to become their director of international campaigns. Chris, are you okay to run the video? Yep, here we go.
The sound's not coming through, I don't believe.
No. Yeah, can you run it again, Chris? The sound's not coming through for some reason.
I'll try again, Chris. I can read it out if necessary.
Okay, just give it a last chance. Just see if we can get the sound. I don't know why that wouldn't be coming through.
There's a button somewhere in Zoom that you have to enable to make sound work. I know because I've had this problem myself. I can't tell you exactly where it is, though.
It was working the other day. If everyone's okay with this, rather than tinker around, I will read out what Rebecca said.
Yeah, that's probably best if you've got that.
That's fine. So you saw her, and now just imagine that she's saying what I'm about to read. Hi, I'm Rebecca Vincent, sending a message of support from Reporters Without Borders. We campaign in the case of WikiLeaks publisher Julian Assange. In fact, it's one of our top global priorities. We believe that he has been targeted because of his contributions to journalism and that his prosecution in the United States would set a precedent for many years to come that would be alarming for journalism and press freedom around the world. We are waiting for news now from the Supreme Court in the UK, which we very much hope will review the case. This case deserves review by the highest court of the land. But regardless, he shouldn't be extradited. In fact, we continue to call on the US government to close the case. They should drop the charges and put a stop to this now. In the meantime, we continue to campaign for the release of Julian Assange.
Right, thanks very much, Chris. Our next speaker is Ian Hodson. Ian's the national president of the Bakers Union and an activist in campaigns such as fast food rights, covering the McStripe and spoon strikes, and Fight for 15. He's recently set up a people-powered community action campaign, this pilot project offering free legal advice to people in Wigan. but he's a strong supporter of this issue. Ian, over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the invitation to speak today. I think I'd like to start by saying, we need to be clear. This imprisonment of Assange is powerful global politicians collaborating to ensure that their dirty secrets that they have in relation to their abuse of power don't become exposed. It's really a cover-up on an international and industrial scale. It appears now politicians and lying have become so normal that both here in the UK and the USA, electing known liars is no longer questionable. Truth seems to be irrelevant in the murky world of politics. Even the current opposition leader in the UK presents himself as one thing because they know the truth will get in the way to their desires to have the levers of power and fulfil what they believe is their entitlement. The Assange's crime, as we've already heard, is that he exposed theirs, and now he faces 175 years for letting the public know about what was going on, the truth and the reality of what was being done to us in the name of alleged justice. It can never be right that telling the truth to the public is classed as espionage. Surely if people are to live in what is supposed to be a democracy, then freedom of speech has to be essential. For trade unionists, we should be under no illusion of what this case is all about. Like every piece of anti-trade union legislation that has been imposed, it's about ensuring people are not able to challenge those in power. And by the arrest and imprisonment of Assange, it sends a clear signal to those in journalism: if they step out of line, they will face being stripped of their freedoms. This is about human rights. It's an abuse of power for them to remove any risk to those at the top of our society by shutting down our freedom of speech and removing our rights, the right to speak the truth to power. Our movement history is full of examples of the state abusing power to stop working people from aspiring to a better life. From the massacre at Portaloo, the deportation of the Tolpuddle martyrs, recently the imprisonment of the Shrewsbury 24, the lies and the smears used against Scargill and the NUM, and the state-sanctioned police riot at Orgreave. These are crimes committed against our class, and they continue today. Ask the victims of Hillsborough. I'm sure they would testify to how they were treated by the state. Or recently, their families and the victims at Grenfell. If it wasn't for some good journalism and bravery of those involved that expose the truth that our politicians and media-owning class want to keep hidden, we would never have known. We would have been fed untruths, as they always have done, to cover the truth. And that's why it is so essential that we stand up and fight for the release of Julian. Going forward, these injustices won't be exposed, as the fear of arrest will deter any real investigation into the crimes of the powerful. I'm under no illusion neither, and neither should anyone else be. What our politicians and those at the top of society want is journalism to be nothing more than their agents of power, presenting their version of events. They don't want quest for questions or the expensive scandal out there in the public known. They want it hidden from us. They want us to believe how they present themselves to us to be the truth. But that is not journalism. Real journalism is about exposing the truth and acting in the interests of the people. We all need to be afraid, but we all have to be brave too. If freedom is something we cherish, justice will never be achievable in the future for anyone if we can't speak out. It really is, in my opinion, as simple as that. Julian Assange's imprisonment is another step on the way to the powerful whose wealth buys the politicians to become so far above the law they are able to do whatever they like. And I think we have seen how they abuse us when they are given the opportunity. Of course, if you've got a rich and powerful mummy, she can always use taxpayers' money to pay for your crimes too. But I close on this. Recent moves to restrict trade unions on the back of decades of restrictions on working people, rights to undermine our human rights of freedom of association, demonstrates that freedom is a word, not a commitment to provide it. It's an illusion It's a contract they perform on us. And the removal of freedom of speech is now their target and in their sights. Trade unions are human rights organisations, and they depend upon the most basic rights, the right of freedom of association and the freedom of speech. We cannot sit back and ignore what is happening because we believe we live in a democracy or feel a loyalty to a political party. History has shown us that even when they have an opportunity, those who claim to be on our side, the people's side, haven't broken that seal that would have brought justice for so many. We cannot allow the powerful to be able to keep getting away with their lies, their smears that lead to wars, not for preservation of life, but for their greed and power. I can't emphasise enough, the imprisonment of Julian actually is about the fear that they will be exposed. The idea of journalists can be charged with espionage for exposing facts to the people is a truly frightening scenario, which puts a huge risk to anyone who wants to expose wrongdoings at the top of our society. Let's stand up for the right to know the truth, our right to speak the truth to power, our rights to freedom of speech. Best wishes to you and your family, Stella. Solidarity with Julian.
Thanks very much indeed, Ian. Powerful stuff, and something that we all need to remember if journalism is to succeed. Our next speaker is a UK-based freelance journalist, Mohammed El-Mazi, who studied law at the University of London's School of Oriental and Asian Studies. He's published with numerous outlets, including The Dissenter, Jacobin, The Canary, and The Electronic Intifada. His writing covers foreign policy, civil liberties and human rights, and he's covered every single hearing in Julian Assange's extradition case since it began, and is going to talk quite specifically about some aspects of the law and try and draw everything together. And all in 8 minutes. Good luck, Mohammed.
Thank you. I'm going to need it. And thank you as well to Stella, Tim, and Ian, as well as the organisers, NUJ Manchester and Salford, as well as Oldham Trade Union Council and the Word newspaper, I think you also said. For the sake of simplicity, if you hear me refer to the parties as defence and prosecution, I'm doing that rather than saying appellant and respondent, because that can get confusing after a while. I'd like to start off with a quote from Dunja Mijatovic, the Council of Europe's Commissioner for Human Rights, a statement she made in February 2020, so 2 years ago, when she was giving her view on the matter at hand, which also reflects the view of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. For people who don't know, the Council of Europe was set up in 1949 after the end of the Second World War. It's a body which established the European Court for Human Rights. The UK is a founding member. That is irrespective of membership of the European Union. Sometimes people get that confused. Here's the quote from the Commissioner of Human Rights. Quote, Julian Assange's potential extradition has human rights implications that reach far beyond his individual case. The indictment raises important questions about the protection of those that publish classified information in the public interest, including those that expose human rights violations. The broad and vague nature of the allegations against Julian Assange and of the offenses listed in the US indictment are troubling, as many of them concern activities at the core of investigative journalism in Europe and beyond. Consequently, allowing Julian Assange's extradition on this basis would have a chilling effect on media freedom and could ultimately hamper the press in performing its task as purveyor of information and public watchdog in democratic societies. Significantly, she adds, furthermore, any extradition to a situation in which the person involved would be at real risk of torture or inhuman or degrading treatment would be contrary to Article 3 of the European Convention on Human Rights. The UN Special Rapporteur on Torture has made clear he considers that both the detention and conditions in the US, as well as the sentence that will be likely imposed on Julian, present such a risk. For that reason, she states that she believes that Julian Assange should not be extradited. That's her assessment as Commissioner for Human Rights. I'll also add a bit more to more context to what Tim mentioned. 17 out of the 18 charges against Julian are under the Espionage Act. All of that relates to his or WikiLeaks receipt from Chelsea Manning documents known collectively as the Afghan Diaries, Iraq War Logs, Guantanamo Bay detainee files, and US diplomatic cables. So nothing whatsoever to do with the 2016 election or anything else for that matter. It's important for people to understand that under the U.S. Espionage Act, which was passed in 1917, it's a strict liability. The offenses that he's charged with are strict liability offenses, which means you do not need to prove harm. Intentions and motivations are irrelevant. There is no public interest defense as well. So you can't say, so Daniel Ellsberg told me when I interviewed him, who was the famous Pentagon Papers whistleblower, he was prosecuted under the Espionage Act. So bear in mind, he was a whistleblower, unlike Julian, who's a journalist and a publisher, who's never signed any official Secrets Act documentation, for example, or confidentiality documents in the US. Daniel Ellsberg told me that when he attempted to explain why he had leaked certain information about the Vietnam War, US-Vietnam relations, the prosecution stood up, said, objection, his motivation, as well as what is inside those revelations are immaterial. And the judge agreed. The judge said, I'm sorry, that's irrelevant. There is no public interest defense, and these are strict liability offenses. And that is what Julian would face. Bear in mind that the charges would also be, they have been filed in the Eastern District of Virginia, which is a not particularly densely populated location where the constituents come from. And indeed, the jury pool comes from areas in Virginia dominated by the CIA, FBI, Homeland Security, and the US military, as well as weapons manufacturers, which means the jury will either be serving members or people who currently work in those institutions, or retired, or family members of such people. Ben Weisner of the American Civil Liberties Union also explained the U.S. indictment this way. For the first time in the history of our country, the government has brought criminal charges against a publisher for the publication of truthful information. This is an extraordinary escalation of the Trump administration's attacks on journalism and a direct assault on the First Amendment. It establishes a dangerous precedent that can be used to target all news organizations that hold the government accountable by publishing its secrets. It's equally dangerous for U.S. journalists who uncover the secrets of other nations. If the U.S. can prosecute a foreign publisher for violating our secrecy laws, there's nothing preventing China or Russia from doing the same. Sometimes I give the example to people. Imagine if I had published, based on secrets provided to me, alleged an actual injury or human rights violations committed in China by the Chinese state, and I had published them here while I was in the UK. And then while I was traveling, say, to the Philippines, the Chinese government issues an extradition request to the Filipino government saying, hey, this person has violated our Official Secrets Act for obtaining documents, which are national defense documents. He didn't have the authority to obtain them. He didn't have the authority to publish them. And he should face up to 175 years in prison, which is what Julian Assange currently faces in terms of the maximum charge for each offense. I think most people would react quite negatively to that possibility, and yet that is exactly what is happening here. It is the extraterritorial application of U.S. criminal law against a non-U.S. citizen for the publication of materials outside of the United States. I cannot stress how significant that is. As a general rule, countries' laws do not apply outside of their borders. It was also mentioned briefly by Tim that the Official Secrets Acts of this country are facing amendment, revision. So the Official Secrets Acts of this country target unauthorized disclosures, leaks, whistleblowing, as well as potential espionage. And there's been a consultation process going on since 2015, looking at revising the current laws. We now know from the government's response to recommendations which were filed or submitted by the Law Commission that A, the government wants to add numerous new offenses, B, they want to increase prison sentence for violation of unauthorized disclosures from a 2-year maximum currently to up to potentially 14 years is being discussed. Also, on the list, they want to introduce an extraterritorial application of the law so that it will apply in some cases to both non-UK citizens as well as people outside of the UK. They want to make it easier to convict people by removing the need to prove actual damages or high likelihood of damages, which is a current test resulting from unauthorized disclosure, and replacing it with a test of knowledge that damages might occur. thereby vastly in making it easier to prosecute and convict people, regardless of any damages being proven or even near proven. And also, despite recommendation, one of the few good things to come out of the Law Commission recommendations is that a public interest defense should be returned to the Official Secrets Act, because once upon a time, there was a public interest defense. And then when it was used a few times successfully, it was then removed years later. The government is not interested in introducing a public interest defense. They've made clear. So I'll just try to bring people now to the current appeal, because it hasn't been mentioned. Just the background to the appeal. There's a presumption in favor of extradition in the UK-US extradition treaty. Therefore, it's down to the defendant or the person being requested to justify to a court, explain to a court why they are an exception to extradition, why they shouldn't be extradited to the United States. The majority of the arguments raised by the defense at the magistrate's court during the main extradition proceedings were rejected by the judge, the district judge, but she did ultimately find that extraditing Julian would be oppressive due to his high risk of suicide, given the conditions that he would be subjected to, such as solitary confinement and so-called special administrative measures. The High Court found that the magistrate's court correctly applied the legal test for barring extradition on health grounds, but they reversed her decision, the judge's decision, on the basis of these qualified assurances provided by the US government that Julian won't be subjected to these extreme conditions, which ultimately initially resulted in the magistrate's courts barring his extradition. These assurances, so currently on discussion, which hopefully the UK Supreme Court will hear, is a technical, though important issue, which is, are assurances issues or are they evidence? Can they be considered by a court after the court of first instance has already decided the case? So the magistrate said, no, he can't be extradited. Can a government, like the US government, come later after everything has been heard, evidence, witness testimony for months and months and months, then go to an appeal court and say, hi, we're going to offer you assurances that he'll be treated fine, please extradite him. And so the High Court thinks, yes, they can do, which is why they reversed the decision, but they agree that the Supreme Court has not considered this and decided this. And they think that the highest court in the land should be able to consider whether assurances should be heard. I know my time's up, so I'm just going to wrap this up quickly. It is significant to note that the High Court refused to certify two other grounds of appeal, and that's whether or not the defense wanted to get the Supreme Court to consider whether someone can say or do something that would then justify a government to subject them to inhuman and degrading treatment, right? The very conditions that the magistrate court held created a high risk of suicide for Julian, for example, on the basis, and that's the basis upon which he barred extradition. Because the High Court have essentially said, yes, Julian can be extradited to the United States because there are assurances that he won't be subjected to cruel and inhuman treatment leading to his potential suicide, unless he says or does something that then justifies being subjected to these extreme measures. And under the European Convention of Human Rights, there is an absolute prohibition of torture, cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment. So what they've essentially done is carve up a loophole to say that you can't be tortured unless you do something that justifies your torture. That's outrageous, but they did not certify that particular ground for appeal to the Supreme Court. I just think it's important for people to understand that. And finally, all is not lost, right? There is a cross appeal which has yet to be dealt with, and that would be in respect of dealing with many, if not all, of the grounds raised by the defense initially that were rejected by the magistrate's court. For example, that the prosecution itself is politically motivated, that Julian could not have a fair trial before a jury in the Eastern District of Virginia, where a jury is composed by current, retired, or family members of those who work at the CIA, FBI, Homeland Security, etc. The Article 10 of the European Convention guarantees the right to receive and impart information, protects non-passive receipt of information, like in the case of journalists seeking information from a source. So there's so much more that could be said on this, but I passed my time, so I'm going to leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mohammed. It was interesting and important stuff, but we need to give others a chance to lead in. Actually, one of the first questions that we've got is, has any work been done on a case to the European Court? As I assume that means to the European Court of Human Rights. And as I understand it, it would have to go through our Supreme Court first. But I don't know, Mohammed, are you able to shed any quick light on that?
Generally, you can't appeal things to the European Court of Human Rights until you've exhausted all your domestic avenues. So that would involve, as far as I'm aware, in this case, either getting a decision from the Supreme Court that's a negative decision, or the UK Supreme Court saying we're actually not going to hear this appeal. And then you can go to the European Court of Human Rights. You have 4 months from that point. It used to be 6 months, but it's been changed now to 4 months. I think because governments want to make it more and more difficult for people to challenge their decisions. So all the contracting parties came together and reduced the time frame you've got.
Lovely, thanks very much. Someone's asking, could someone please refer to the disgusting role of Keir Starmer in prolonging a baseless Swedish case in order to legitimise holding Julian for ultimate transfer to the US? I don't know, you've spoken out about Keir, Ian. I don't know if you wanted to pick up on that question, or don't have to, but
I'm happy to go into some of the some
sorry.
of what this is based on.
Okay,
So,
yeah, go on then, Stella. I'm sorry, Ian.
this goes back to when Keir Starmer was the Director of Public Prosecutions, which coincided with Julian's arrest in the UK in relation to the Swedish extradition. What was in relation to the Swedish investigation, preliminary investigation, I should say, because it never reached a stage of indictment or charge. The CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, behaved very strangely throughout. And this was one of the most high-profile cases under the purview of the CPS. There's supposed to be a Chinese wall in which the CPS has its prosecutorial function, and then another function is it is basically acting for the extraditing state. And as such, it doesn't have skin in the game, supposedly, in relation to a foreign extradition. Now, in relation to Julian's case, it's quite clear, or it's very clear now, through Freedom of Information Act requests that have produced documentation, that the CPS was did have skin in the game, or was the recommendations it was making went beyond just providing advice to a foreign state that was trying to extradite someone. So, for example, the EU mechanisms for questioning a person within the EU are well established. And at the time, Sweden was routinely questioning people in the UK, people who had been charged, even charged with very serious crimes. And this wasn't the case for Julian. He wasn't charged with anything. And the CPS, from the start, encouraged Sweden not to use those mechanisms, not to question Julian in the UK. And the reason they gave is that then he will be able to defend himself publicly, and that wait until he's in Sweden, because then he'll be able to be, because once he would be in Sweden, he would be on remand in prison, even without a charge. And then there's all this FOIA material has come out as a result of an Italian journalist who was making Freedom of Information Act requests to the CPS. And during that time, the CPS actually destroyed, I think, over thousands and thousands of emails between Sweden and the CPS. Some of them have not been destroyed, partly because they've been obtained from Sweden, and some which were not destroyed from the Crown Prosecution Service. But through the emails that we know, that we've seen that have not been destroyed, we know that Sweden also tried to close down the case in 2013, and the CPS told Sweden, don't you dare get cold feet, and told them not to close the case against Julian. So the CPS's role, not only in preventing a person from being able to exercise their right to defend themselves by being questioned under normal circumstances. Why treat Julian differently? You know, there's been this kind of, oh, he shouldn't be treated any differently to anyone else. He has been treated differently to everyone else from day one. This is the important thing to understand. This is the essence of the persecution, right? And all this happened while Keir Starmer was the head of the CPS. The destroying of the thousands of emails between Sweden and the UK and the Crown Prosecution Service is especially incriminating. What do we not know? What we know is bad enough, and I think there are many legitimate questions that remain unresolved. Unlike, you know, if you look back at Keir Starmer's time as DPP, there was an investigation into the Savile investigation, which said, you know, whoever was responsible for making that decision not to prosecute, that's one thing. But the question about the CPS's conduct in the investigation, in the extradition case against Julian in relation to Sweden, remains unresolved, and there are lots of questions that Keir Starmer that should be posed to Keir Starmer in relation to that, and to the CPS in general.
Lovely, thanks, Stella. There's a question from Jeremy Fox, who notes that this is more of a political issue. So I'll ask two questions, really. Is it conceivable that we can succeed without a change of government in the UK? And also, if the law's in fact complicit with this, how do we avoid concluding that the law becomes biased when the political stakes are sufficiently high? Perhaps Ian and then Tim, perhaps you'd like to have a crack at that. Any thoughts?
I mean, on the issue of changing the government, I would suggest the answer in relation to Keir Starmer being a change to what would happen to Julian Assange is probably not likely. I think the issue is it's got to be about what we do, you know, what trade unions do, what pressure we can put on as people. And that need to demand the truth. I think that's what needs to happen. I think it's, you know, it's how we, you know, come together to support Julian Assange and make it impossible for them to carry out this extradition. And I think that's the critical point. And I think, you know, that's why, obviously, from the reason why I'm here today, obviously to support what the NUJ has been doing through the TUCG. But it has to go wider than that. You know, we have to get all of the trade unions involved. There has to be pressure applied. You know, it should be on the news every day. You know, this is an attack on our freedoms and our right to be able to know the truth. And that's fundamentally, in my opinion, what the whole issue is about. The right for us to know the truth.
Thanks, Ian. Tim, any comments?
Well, I mean, Daniel Ellsberg's been mentioned before, and the attempt to prosecute him, I think, is really interesting because the CIA and the FBI threw everything they had at him, and they had an administration who were willing for him to be sent to prison. He had secretly photocopied this massive report showing how successive American governments had lied to the American people in order to make the war in Vietnam happen. I mean, Ellsberg now says his great regret is that he didn't publish it earlier when he first had it in his hands, because it might have saved hundreds and thousands of lives. But the judge overseeing his case, I think, had been promised the deputy directorship of the CIA if Ellsberg went down. But as the case continued, as the evidence mounted of the dirty tricks against him built up and built up and built up, eventually, despite the inducements put to the judge said, we can't carry on like this. You know, this case has no merit. And not only that, but I dismiss it. I think the terminology is with prejudice, meaning that in no circumstances can it be brought again. Now, exactly which was the straw that broke the camel's back, whether it was the breaking into Ellsberg's apartment or the stealing of documents from his psychiatrist's clinic, what it was that eventually made that, broke the dam, I guess we'll never know. And I think the same is true here. Exactly what it is that will finally make the absurdity of this attempted prosecution evident and will stop it, we don't know. All we can do is throw as much pressure at it as humanly we can.
Thanks, Tim. The next three questions all concern Belmarsh, essentially. What's the given justification for still keeping Julian actually in Belmarsh rather than anywhere else? How long can he be trapped there? How many years? Is there a limit? The questioner accepts that's a bit like asking how long's a piece of string, but it's an interesting question. And then finally, on this issue, getting Julian out of Belmarsh on bail while waiting for review, is that a possibility? And if not, why not? So perhaps Mohammed, and I don't know if you want to come in on it as well, Stella, have some comments on that. Why Belmarsh? How long?
Well, it's completely absurd and wrong. My reading of it is that that's where they put political prisoners or prisoners in politically charged cases. Julian being, an obvious political prisoner. And because it's a high security prison, or the most high security prison in the land, it's also one that has the most surveillance. I think that's one of the reasons. They're monitoring him very closely from an intelligence perspective. All of our, all his conversations, and that's what Belmarsh is. It's full of cameras with lip reading, AI, and it's that's where they keep people that they want to keep tabs on. Then there's another aspect, which is the kind of the revenge of the judiciary, I would say, because he defied the courts by seeking asylum and obtaining asylum, which is even graver, and obtaining asylum in the middle of Knightsbridge. I think there's a lot of anger by the establishment that Julian did that, and that the judiciary has shown undue hostility in relation to Julian, and I don't think I hope that the UK judiciary is robust enough in order to resist the extradition. But in relation to bail, the judgments that we've had so far have been very quite inappropriate and hostile. And it was that when Julian when he was in the embassy, he took the UK and Sweden, a complaint against the UK and Sweden to the UN, and the UN investigated for 14 months. The UK and Sweden both took part. It was an adversarial process. It wasn't like the UN just heard Julian's arguments. They asked the states to justify their actions, which they tried to do, and the UN found in favor of Julian. And some of you might remember when this happened, the UK then proceeded to pretend like this body, which was the peak UN body for arbitrary detention, the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, was a group of, people who didn't know what they were talking about. They're not even lawyers, kind of thing. Whereas they're actually the peak experts in their fields, and denigrating this body, which is part of the UN Human Rights Council, which the UK, has established, and when it's about Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe or other people who are under arbitrary detention, the UK doesn't doubt to invoke the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention. But I think that was a clear indication that the UK establishment, the UK government, was willing to just throw even the UN under the bus when it came to justifying its actions. And I think to a degree, the law certainly plays a role in this, but there's a lot. It's a political case. There's a lot of politics going on. There's a lot of there are a lot of other things going on, and we will certainly try to get bail, but that's the dynamic.
Thanks, Stella. Mohammed, anything to add?
Not really. I would say the main reason he's being held is, as Stella mentioned, because he's convicted of absconding while on bail. Now, even though that was for obtaining an internationally recognized right, which is the right of asylum, it's not like he just ran off. Let's not forget that the speedboat killer got a more severe sentence for absconding while on bail, and in his case, he just ran away. He didn't obtain a right, an asylum right, which, by the way, Britain and the United States recognized. So when you had, for example, people in the Soviet Union would go to the U.S. embassy, and the Soviet government would say, "Hey, this person has violated X, Y, and Z law." The U.S. would then consider the asylum claim of said individual. They wouldn't just say, "Oh no, you've absconded while on bail." So, but the reality is, I don't think the courts like how that ended up, which was that he obtained the right to asylum, and I think they think it makes them look foolish, and it's quite difficult to get, I think, a court to grant bail unless there's a reversal. Right. If there's a reversal of fortunes, then I think it enhances his opportunity. I mean, obviously, if Julian wins at the Supreme Court, that's the end of the matter. Right. So we'll see.
Fingers crossed for that. The last question we've got, and we've probably got time for one or two more if anybody's keen to put one on the Q&A box. This last one says, regarding the collateral murder footage, why has no one been held to account for these war crimes? The only people held to account regarding this heinous crime was Chelsea Manning for exposing it, and Mr. Assange for telling the people the truth, which we're entitled to know. It's perhaps a bit broader than any of you are able to answer, but if anybody's got any thoughts or just wants to make a comment on that, please go ahead. No, I'm not sure I would.
I mean, why has no one been held accountable for any of the other war crimes and crimes against humanity, which were exposed both from Afghan diaries, Guantanamo Bay detainee files, Iraq, I mean, the one person who was convicted over the My Lai massacre, and there were a lot of them involved, was ultimately pardoned by which president? Is that Reagan who pardoned him? He didn't spend particularly long in prison. And there was, I think it was like 500 villagers, men, women, and children, who were executed over an extended period of hours, right? And they took breaks and they had sandwiches, and then they went back to killing, right? So it's victor's justice, right? So it's not an accountable enough system, right? I think is the issue.
Yeah,
Thanks for that, Mohammed. It's very useful. A couple of questions have just come in. One sort of goes back to how long can the UK judicial system drag all this out, and I think we've covered that, and that also includes when might we expect a decision of the Supreme Court. But one that has come up before and has been asked, will physical meetings to support Julian help? I mean, a couple of people have said in the chat box as well, would holding meetings, would holding protests outside Belmarsh, would that at the very least give Julian some sense of support? And also, I'm not sure whether you said that he got post or not, Stella, but people are certainly saying, could they write to him? Will he actually get the letters? Any thoughts on that? Probably particularly from you, Stella.
He receives some post. We know that Belmarsh doesn't deliver all of it. It censors. It goes through all the letters that come in, any communication that comes in. So that's something to keep in mind. But he doesn't receive it all, and it's not really clear what the criteria is for when he receives and when he doesn't. In terms of physical meetings, I think it's always important for people to meet face to face and to form a network and a community, and to meet, like-minded people, and to also think about how to find new ways to expand that community into other communities, and to build bridges into other communities. The issues to do with Julian's case are just so important, and they affect everyone. And it really is about reaching that critical mass of people who understand how the case affects them as well.
Thanks, Stella. Anybody else?
I'm physical meetings are amazing. I appeared on a panel with Stella at SOAS, I don't know, 2-3 weeks ago, and it was the first actual meeting I've been to for 2 years, and it did feel slightly giddy to actually be looking at an audience and actually have some sense of whether what one was saying was being well received, and how purposeful that was. That said, I think that doing meetings this way is also really, really helpful. And while the experience is very different, here we are, I think we are spread into two of us, I think, are in London, the rest of you are in the Northwest. That would be a lot more difficult to organise. Looking at the comments, there are people from all over, many of whom I suspect would not be in Manchester on a Sunday lunchtime listening to this. So, I think we have to find every means to communicate with people that we can, and recognise that being in the same place is valuable, and doing things by video sharing is also valuable.
Yes, thanks, Tim. I think that's absolutely right. It's much more difficult to get a group as diverse as this together for a conference than it is to set up a webinar like this. Someone's said that they missed the part where it said, when will we like to know about the Supreme Court? As I understood it, that's a bit vague. No one's able to pin a date down specifically. Is that correct? That's what I took from what you were saying, Stella. We haven't got a date for the Supreme.
We don't have a deadline. As a guide, it could be any time within the next. We expect it within the next 6 weeks, but it could take longer. Because Julian's in custody, they tend to expedite such cases. But yeah, I don't know. It will also depend on their backlog and so on.
Thanks very much, Stella. Well, I need to wind it up now, so that we can all go off and do our various things. I know Chris, who is sort of manning behind the scenes, has to go off and do another meeting. He's a glutton for punishment, and thanks very much to him for all his hard work over this, and for the branch as well. Has anybody got any last words that any of our speakers that they just want to say just before we finish? No, come on, Tim. Yes.
Oh, my sense, I've been, involved in this for several years now. My sense is that in terms of changing hearts and minds, we are succeeding, and both in the everyday realm of people you come up to and meet, being supportive, and institutions, be they trade unions, be they news platforms, are coming around. So I think it's worth continuing to keep the pressure up and keep doing the work, because it is having an effect.
I think you're right. We've got a fantastic turnout for this webinar, and quite clearly people are really in there to fight this one, that they do see the absolute importance of supporting Julian right to the end, and supporting freedom. Did you want a last word, Mohammed? Just got a bit of time.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, in my opinion, if enough political pressure builds up, then the US government may ultimately decide to withdraw the extradition request. Because remember, it's the US requesting Julian. It's not like if they dropped their request, he would still be extradited. So the more political pressure is placed, the more that might ultimately, if it is made difficult. I mean, ironically, the fact that Boris Johnson's got so many different crises make it easier for someone like him to go to the Americans and say, you know what, we've been, you've had your pound of flesh. This has been going on for years now. I'm getting loads of pressure from my MPs to drop this because of all the pressure they're getting from their constituents. Can you just say that, okay, enough is enough and just withdraw the extradition request, please? And being allies, the Americans might say, okay, yeah, fair enough. This is causing problems for our junior partner. But he wouldn't do that unless he feels it's sufficient pressure. So I would say strongly urge your elected representatives to oppose it. I would be polite and concise, right? So get straight to the point. Don't waterboard them with pages and pages of material, right? Just get straight into the point. What is it you're asking for? Why? And avoid screaming at them, because that just makes it easy for them to ignore you if you do that. I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Mohammed. Excellent advice and a really good way of proceeding, I think, to make sure that we eventually get the right result. Thank you very much to all our speakers. Sorry, Stella.
Just quickly add to Mohammed's points, which are great. Also, argue from authority. Cite the NUJ, cite Amnesty, cite the CPJ. All these things are, if you go to don'textraditeassange.com, it has a collection of statements by, the UN, Council of Europe, etc. Cite organizations that are experts on these topics. And then, then the people you're addressing, implicitly you're saying, why are you deviating from Amnesty, the NUJ, CPJ, etc. Another thing I'd say is buy Neil Smeltzer's book, The Trial of Julian Assange, Story of Persecution. It's out now, published by Verso. Also, Stefania Maurizi's book will be out in English soon. If there are people that you think should be informed about this case and aren't, purchase a book and send it to them, or write to them and ask them to purchase it. And just stay engaged. Follow me on Twitter. If there are protests, please come one day. And be part of the movement, because we're on the right side of history, and Julian needs each and every one of you.
Thanks, Stella. And thanks to all the speakers. Thanks to Tim Dawson, Mohammed Almazi, Ian Hodson, but most of all to Stella for joining us and putting the case, explaining why this is so important, and asking you all to join in and do everything you can to help Julian get out of Belmarsh and away from the charges that he's facing. Thanks very much to all of you who've attended this webinar. I hope you've got a good takeaway from it, that you're able to go out and spread the word to other people. And thanks very much for all of you. All the best. And that's the end of this webinar. Thank you.